The smell of fried chicken and melted cheese hung thick in the air as Mia sat in her car, the fast food bags crinkling under her fingers. The feast she had ordered was massive. Double burgers dripping with sauce, a bucket of golden fries, a milkshake thick enough to chew. She told herself this was the last time, as she always did. Starting tomorrow, she'd eat clean, hit the gym, and stop using food to fill the aching void inside her. But tonight was her final goodbye to indulgence. She parked at her usual spot, an abandoned lot with cracked pavement and flickering streetlights. As she unwrapped her first burger, something felt different. The air grew heavy, almost sticky, and the light from the street lamps seemed to dim. The first bite was ecstasy, a flood of salt, fat, and sugar that hit her brain like fireworks. But then, she felt it. A shift. A ripple beneath her skin. She ignored it at first, brushing it off as guilt-induced nausea. But as she devoured the fries, the sensation grew. It was as if the food wasn't just sitting in her stomach, it was spreading, crawling through her veins, embedding itself in her very being. Her hands trembled as she reached for the milkshake, but she couldn't stop. The urge to consume was overwhelming, primal. The first sign that something was truly wrong came with the chicken nuggets. As she bit into one, she swore she heard a faint scream, not from outside but from the nugget itself. Startled, she dropped it, staring at the crispy morsel. It twitched. She blinked, convinced she was hallucinating. The nugget didn't move again, but a chilling thought crept into her mind. Did it just beg for mercy? Panic set in, but so did hunger. A gnawing, insatiable hunger that made her mouth water and her stomach growl with feral intensity. Mia tried to resist, but her hands moved on their own, shoveling fries and nuggets into her mouth as tears streamed down her face. "Please stop!" As the last fry disappeared into her mouth, the transformation began with horrifying violence. Her skin bubbled and stretched, veins bulging grotesquely as if something massive writhed just beneath the surface. Her stomach ballooned outward, the flesh splitting in jagged tears that oozed a thick, yellowish grease. Her limbs twisted unnaturally, joints snapping loudly as her body contorted into an alien form. She clawed desperately at her throat, nails ripping into her skin, but nothing came out. No relief, no scream, only the rancid stench of decay rising from within. Her eyes darted to the rearview mirror, and what stared back wasn't a reflection but a grotesque parody of her face, bloated, oozing with deep black hollows where her eyes should have been, and a gaping maw that pulsed with glistening, jagged teeth, dripping in the remnants of her own flesh. She was no longer Mia. Her face had twisted into a grotesque mask, her eyes blackened and sunken, her lips swollen and glistening with grease. Her skin shimmered unnaturally as if coated in oil. Worst of all, her mouth had widened into an unholy gash, lined with rows of jagged teeth. The food in her stomach churned violently, and a voice, a collective guttural voice, spoke from within her. "You fed us. Now we feed." Before she could process the horror, her body lurched forward. She wasn't in control anymore. Her hands gripped the steering wheel as her foot slammed on the gas. The car sped down the empty street, her monstrous face illuminated in the mirror by the eerie glow of the dashboard. Mia, or whatever she had become, arrived at a 24-hour diner. She stumbled out of the car, her bloated frame lumbering awkwardly. The smell of frying bacon wafted through the air, and the hunger surged anew. She burst through the diner's doors, patrons turning to stare at the strange, greasy figure. "Feed us, or we feed on you." Mia lunged at the nearest table, her monstrous hands grabbing a plate of pancakes. She devoured them in seconds, syrup and crumbs spraying everywhere. The diners screamed, some fleeing, others frozen in shock. But the food wasn't enough. The hunger wasn't satisfied. She turned to the people. Her jagged teeth didn't just sink into flesh, they shredded it. Muscle fibers tore apart like wet paper as her maw clamped down, pulling sinew and ligaments free with sickening slurping sounds. Blood erupted in thick arterial sprays, painting the walls in gruesome crimson streaks. Her claw-like hands ripped at her victims with feral intensity, disemboweling them in one horrific motion. Guts spilled onto the linoleum floor, steaming and glistening under the harsh diner lights. Bone cracked like dry twigs as she bit down harder, chewing with a grotesque, wet crunch that sent chunks of tissue flying. The voices in her stomach roared with laughter, a hellish symphony of malice that echoed through the carnage. By the time the police arrived, the diner was a scene of pure annihilation. The air was thick with the metallic stench of blood and the rotting odor of ruptured organs. Mia, or what remained of her, sat in the center of the massacre, her body swollen and grotesque, her bloated form glistening with grease and gore. Blood pooled around her, mingling with the remnants of flesh, shattered bones and tangled entrails that surrounded her like an unholy offering. Her glossy, food-slicked exterior pulsated rhythmically, as though something alive and ravenous still writhed beneath her skin, waiting to claim more. The officers raised their weapons, shouting for her to surrender. She smiled, if you could call that hideous grin a smile, and spoke for the first time since the transformation. Maya, you can't stop the hunger. The police didn't approach immediately. Their guns were drawn, but their faces were masks of horror. Something wasn't right. Mia, or the creature she had become, wasn't just sitting in the carnage, she was humming. A low, chilling tune that made the officer's skin crawl. As one officer stepped closer, her bloated form twitched. Her head jerked unnaturally to the side, her lips curling into a smile far too wide for any human face. "You think this ends with me?" The officer hesitated, but his radio crackled. "HQ to all units. Reports are coming in. Similar incidents at 3 other locations. No, make that 7. Mia let out a wet, gurgling laugh. Her body convulsed, shifting grotesquely, as if something inside her was trying to escape. It's already too late. Before the officer could react, her body exploded, not in blood and gore, but in a shower of greasy black mist that rushed toward him and his team. He screamed as it seeped into his eyes, mouth, and lungs. His body went rigid, his veins bulging with dark, pulsating tendrils. His gun dropped to the floor. "We don't die, we multiply." The officer turned to his comrades, his eyes now pits of black void, his grin stretching unnaturally wide. Behind him, the greasy mist slithered toward the others and the sound of distant screams filled the air. The diner was just the beginning.